Coleman, author, and welcome back. In this video, we're going to be talking about a couple different areas and things, but that all directly relate to each other as far as evidence-based analysis goes. Now, the first thing that we'll look at is a board of Fairfield County in Ohio meeting minutes. And this is listed as a regular meeting number 46 from October 22nd, 2024. Now, the entire contents of this meeting is not applicable, but there are certain parts that, when read and put into context of other corroborating documents, certain elements become apparent. The first thing to note is that the commissioners, of which there are three, as is mostly the case, are Jeff Fix, Steve Davis, and a Dave L. Levesey, or Levesey, or however you want to spell it. It's likely French, being Le Voici, but I'm sure that they don't say it like that. So the first note here is that a Christine Simmons, allegedly CEO of United Way of Fairfield County, thanked Commissioner Davis for serving on the United Way board. And things get a lot more interesting after that. First, when it comes to this United Way entity, it's listed that a Hardbarger Impact Ministries is one of 25 agencies that are supported through United Way, and that support for United Way comes from employee giving. Take of that what you will. They're also behind something called the Dolly's Imagination Library, serving children 0 to 5, which coincidentally is also the age group related to a particular child trafficking organization, Ring, around Montgomery County in Dayton, Ohio, and basically the southeast region, and then on beyond into other states, and in fact internationally into Canada, at least as far as I traced it anyway. And I did a recent video about that. In addition, the individual from United Way stipulates that $26 will put a book in a child's hand for a year. So, for one, that's very interesting, because most books, if they're not free, do not cost $26. And then, of course, there's the apparent $26 does not even allow for that book to be owned. So that makes you wonder exactly what they're talking about here, because that sounds a little bit strange. Also, Feeding Our Future, which I haven't looked into yet, and the VITA TCE tax program. So why is United Way, a private entity, involved in a tax program and supporting that? That's a little bit strange. And apparently they helped 1,200 people file taxes. So they've obviously got some sort of CPA business going on here with United Way, which I was unaware had that particular capacity to it. But you have this organization filing taxes for people and also behind a tax program. And that doesn't even come close to the amount of quote-unquote conflicts of interest that one will find in this document alone. Auditor Brown pledged to Dolly's Imagination Library, which is from the United Way, and apparently was involved in a Making Numbers Count seminar in which she shared demographic statistics. And I also did a video about how the Freemason organization, as evident in their symbol and much of their different practices, is essentially speaking a spy organization that does its work by collecting information on communities and then leveraging that information against those communities so that things can be administered on behalf of foreign entities inimical to the country and the people. And Commissioner Fix pledged to the library as well. Now, there's a couple other interesting notes here. Well, I'll move on to the more significant portion here, which is essentially a sort of exchange, if you will, between an individual from Soil and Water with its own board and the commissioners. Commissioner Fix stated there is a staff member at Soil and Water who has continued to undermine the commissioners and make unmerited claims against the county. And that right there, of course, you get the perspective which these individuals have, that they're essentially speaking local rulers, lords of the region. They can do whatever they want, and anybody who stands against them will suffer the consequences. That is the perspective of the quote-unquote elected representatives that we have, so-called. Commissioner Davis added that when the board makes funding decisions, it is indicative of their support for that agency's policies. Now that line could be quoted there. I'll repeat it again. Commissioner Davis added that when the board makes funding decisions, it is indicative of their support for that agency's policies. So essentially speaking here, not only does he declare that funding, the funding leash, is their essential mechanism for getting people to do what they want, but that element right there is also going to confirm something else that we're going to look at right after this. Ms. Drake asked that the board not judge Soil and Water based on the actions of one individual. And isn't this interesting? The amount of effort they're going to because of one person saying something bad about this board. Administrator Cordell urged Ms. Davis to have a conversation with her staff and the Soil and Water Board of Directors. Now, of course, we can all expect that whoever the quote-unquote individual is won't be at their work long, and somebody should probably look in on that to ensure that they don't get suicided. But either way, the perspective here is very apparent. And that single phrase that I repeated about how they use funding in order to, essentially speaking, show their support, being lords of the region and land, obviously unconstitutionally, is used in an actual orchestrated operation with more sinister motives behind it, and that these individuals are in fact enemy operators carrying out a strategic plan relative to an unnamed organization. This is about protocols. The protocol document 47B, Housing Resource Naturalization. Phase 1, Information Gathering. Conduct covert surveillance of target areas, identify key community leaders and potential resistors, map out all available housing resources, assess current occupancy rates and demographics. So of course we also had the listing in there about that individual who was sharing demographic statistics and information like that. Phase 2, Resource Depletion. Gradually reduce maintenance and upkeep of targeted housing. Implement subtle infrastructure degradation, and introduce controlled scarcity of essential services. This phase 2 is absolutely confirmed by that phrase from that commissioner stating that their funding is indicative of their support. And of course, naturally speaking, on the other hand, lack of funding is indicative of their lack of support. Essentially speaking, they're making decisions based off of their support, not the support of the people, as they claim to be representatives of. They are not. They are instead representatives of themselves, as according to what that individual said. Phase 3, Relocation Initiative. Launch public health and safety campaigns to justify relocations, offer incentives for voluntary relocation, implement mandatory evacuation orders where necessary, coordinate with re-education centers for resistant individuals. And also, this phase is indeed confirmed as well by their emphasis on the quote-unquote individual who is undermining the commission at Soil and Water. So that tells you exactly who we're dealing with and what their perspectives are. They're extremely arrogant. They hold nothing but contempt for anyone but themselves. And they're very vindictive, and they will definitely stoop to violent and dangerous measures to get what they want. Of course, their primary mechanism is, of course, the quote-unquote funding, of which one has to wonder where they get their funding from. Phase 4, area securitization. Establish perimeter control around neutralized zones. Deploy automated surveillance systems. Initiate disinformation campaigns to deter resettlement. And prepare sites for future repurposing. And this note also says Phase 5 protocols are classified access restricted to Level 7 clearance and above. This is not a military document. This is most definitely a civilian organization document. It has none of the telltale signs of it being military in the way that military runs their different elements. Now, I highly doubt that this is not done under a corporation per se, a business, some sort of private contractor. It could be, of course, but also more than likely it's under a quote-unquote DoD contract. So you would look at something like this, and if you actually found out where it came from, then it would probably relate back to the quote-unquote Department of Defense, of which every contract is under the Department of Defense as per the executive order from 2018 prioritizing defense contracting. But the Department of Defense is a civilian agency. It is not the military. Anytime somebody says somebody's doing this under the Department of Defense, what they're attempting to do is use the military as the scapegoat, when in fact these people are actually opposed to the military, attempting to leverage their sins against an adversary, considering the fact they're foreign, and those that joined the armed services swear oaths of allegiance to the Constitution. Not support, allegiance. That is the primary reason why the U.S. Armed Forces, as far as these people are concerned, have to go. Now, the next thing that I'll note, it seems somewhat detracted, but is in fact connected. And that is a particular element in Colorado. And bear with me, I'm going to find my notes on that. It's actually Park City, Utah is where we start. Listing an Amity Moran manager. It's an interesting name there, isn't there? Colony Operations, Homeowners Association, The Colony, Tuesday, June 20th, 2023. 381,000 of material. Tech community install Starlink as backup for fiber going down. It's an interesting preparatory note there. Hark and Gerhardt, coal. And as I've done many different things on the coals and that last name in relation to trial trafficking and associated with specifically construction operations. Somehow always linked to foster care and different other things like that, and always, involved in some kind of activities that are suspicious, and all with these other elements that add up as well. And this references wall remediation and hark drilling at St. Mary's, Park City, Utah. Next we have Entropy Capital Incorporated at 3083 Warham Road, Columbus, Ohio. So the last thing for this video I'm going to do is read a report on operations of treason and adverse occupation apparently detrimental to the domestic tranquility of the country and nation. And here I have a disclaimer. Some of the work referenced in this letter is intellectual property protected by copyright and is instituted under the Fair Use Act or otherwise applicable law with full faith and credit given to the property owners. And of course that's a formality. Purpose of the report. Acts against veterans, sometimes in a belligerent manner, demonstrate the purpose behind numerous covert elements which appear to be growing more and more brazen. As directed in the Presidential Oath of Office in the Constitution, in addition to applicable articles and amendments, It is a sworn duty of members of the armed forces to uphold and defend the Constitution against all enemies, with special consideration for the domestic tranquility listed in the preamble. And also not written here, but as a important note, that oath is also of allegiance to the Constitution. You can only, of course, ever have one allegiance. As stipulated in the U.S. Constitution's preamble, one of the primary purposes to the supreme law of the land is the ensuring of domestic tranquility, otherwise known as maintaining the peace. Some of these acts against veterans come in a personal nature, while others appear to be part of covert psychological operations to damage the image of veterans, the U.S. Armed Forces, and the security of all constitutionally sworn force elements, clearly based out of a desire to supplant and ultimately destroy the various armed forces of the United States, thus, of course, making this acts of war and also the constitutionally defined treason. This coordinated attack, often under the guise of aid or assistance, is only the tip of the proverbial spear. In fact, because of our shared responsibility to defend the country and people, our lives of current service and prior service members have been put into jeopardy, but the ultimate goal is conquest of the country and her people. Physical occupation is the next element that shows the motive behind our current covert and well-coordinated assault upon the country and nation. Not ours. During extensive research into these continuing enemy operations, the most insidious element concerns the effect upon our children, as it appears the enemy operations contain an integral component of child trafficking, human harvesting, and mass murder. In most cases, if not all, it appears that the face of these enemy elements comes out of the very entities that we call government. Even more concerning, it is becoming transparently clear that governance of the country is not held by nor for the interests of the majority of the people that reside here, nor does it appear that governmental elements are even adherents of the U.S. Constitution, but rather opponents. What many refer to as special interest groups can be practically identified as the subset units of an occupying enemy division, operating the cover or guise of lawful authority, while not simply carrying out the interest of theft and pillage, but the wholesale destruction of this land, the people, and those that volunteer for their defense. In this report, personal evidence will be offered in addition to the corroborative proof of analyzed documents and actions taken to warn the public population of this widespread danger. Hostile operations against veterans. The impoverishment of veterans, specifically, appears to be a primary component and objective to undermine the defense of the country and her people. Simply summarized, the objective is to force veterans into declaring themselves mentally defective, so that a guardian may be appointed to administer their assets and their weapons might be taken. In this manner, the threat that veterans pose to enemy elements might be neutralized. A certain number of entities are integral to this operation, primarily functioning under the cover of the so-called Department of Veterans Affairs, which is no longer a federal agency pursuant to the United States Code. Yet states continue to operate under the perception that the Department of Veterans Affairs remains federal. In addition, the probate courts of the several counties appoint veterans as wards of the state, an example of which can be found in the local rules for Ohio's probate court in Fairfield County. However, as can be found with the lunacy laws of Pennsylvania and the administration of veteran dissidents in the U.S. Code, this covert assault against force and readiness concept has been for a long time planned. Assault against the image of the U.S. Armed Forces and veterans is presently being carried out under the protective cover of religious institutions and nonprofits. An apparent example can be found under the alleged support services for veteran families. Another example is with a fundraising event for building a lodge in Hocking County, Ohio, where a summarized analysis demonstrates the cover of local activity being used by distantly residing interests. Yet again, a supposedly veteran support group in Fairfield County, Ohio, has a direct link to a church structure which is itself hidden behind a web of cover identities. In this context, it is easily understood how veterans are corralled into poverty under the motive of sabotage and with the ultimate goal of facilitating a successful invasion and overt enemy occupation. In reference to veterans with no apparent support, financial or otherwise, many give themselves up to being declared as mentally defective and are twisted into the image of a groveling vagabond. an image which these enemy occupiers wish to promote, not only does such an image create irreparable harm to the morale of the people, but it also assists to shift the support of local populations toward a different set of armed forces. The coming enemy occupation will apparently be done under the auspices of law enforcement, evident in a fraudulent Department of Defense document, which can be identified as such by corroborative analysis, listed in a notice to residents warning of this impending operation. The apparent invasion will not be conducted by bringing foreign forces to the country's shores. Instead, many apparently separate elements will be marshaled. These may include the use of organized criminal groups, drug dealers, the chemically addicted, vagrants, and displaced people to provide the manpower for this domestic takeover. The nonprofit and religious institutions will apparently facilitate the supply of such elements, providing shelter, food, clothing, vehicles, and other types of supplies. Finally, passage through the enemy occupation lines will be conducted by the use of blue envelopes under the guise of declared autism. And of course, as we all know, the other shoe on the foot is the color red, so one has to wonder in what context the color red is reflected for the other side of the blue envelope. Blue and red, of course, being the known colors for quote-unquote law enforcement. The interconnected nature of the alleged court system, so-called law enforcement, and nonprofits is evident in a circumstance of unlawful seizure of a disabled veteran. As submitted in an incident report and attached notice to the Fairfield County Probate Court in Ohio, the unlawful seizure of a veteran that was ruled a ward of the state shows the monetarily incentivized program to target veterans. In addition, the documents for the fundraising event in Fairfield County, Ohio, show a desire to substitute the first responder moniker for veteran and uniformed service. Furthermore, the seizure of weaponry under emergency guardianship is a clear-cut move to remove the force and readiness component that veterans provide, followed by the uniformed services themselves. The documents between a nonprofit entity called the Ohio Benevolent Patrolmen's Association demonstrate a shifting in law enforcement moniker to blatantly private interests with the apparent motive of levying a first responder occupational army. Hostile operations against the land. The supreme law of the land, being addressed in Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution, puts precisely into context the operation to render desolate the United States of America. This operation is not simply to steal the land, but to violate it and all that is contained upon it. However, to begin, it must first be understood the fraudulent ownership and usurpation leveraged to inflict such damage against the land and her people. The local rules for the probate court of Fairfield County in Ohio give evidence of fraudulent land acquisition under Local Rule 65.1a, Initial Certification of Title. It states that the county treasurer must always be named as a defendant, even if all real estate taxes are current. In addition to, as referenced in a letter to local residents, the majority of allegedly public service attorneys in Ohio relate to state planning and probate. Business and real estate filings show an interconnected web of false identity and ownership with a monopolized building and land market under the blessing of the apparent governmental apparatus at municipal, state, and county levels, with a colluding organization that leverages governmental decrees to corner the housing market, push residents into poverty, and force acquisition. A primary vehicle for these fraudulent acquisitions can be found in the Ohio General Code, where it states all administrators, executors, trustees, and any such grantee under a conveyance made during the grantor's life shall be liable for all such taxes with lawful interest as hereinafter provided until they have been paid as hereinafter directed. Such taxes shall become due and payable immediately upon the death of the decedent and shall at once become a lien upon the property. The fraudulent law of trespass is inappropriately enforced against the land and the people. During a call with the Lancaster Police Department in the year 2020, it was stipulated by the dispatcher that no mask mandates would be enforced, but that trespass would be. The very same pretext used to make the Second Amendment of the Constitution a dead letter. An apparent law dictionary from 1883 clarifies the use of the term trespass to mean damages against another's property, which only allows for the bringing of suit for recuperation. However, this is the This is intentionally misconstrued to give pretext for the unlawful seizure of persons, criminal violations of the U.S. Constitution, the deprivation of life, carried out against those that dutifully assist such enemy belligerents. Therefore, under this understanding, so-called law enforcement acts on nothing but the interest of preserving the alleged property of corporations and corporate governance over that of natural possession. Thus, the old custom and practice of salvage is subverted, allowing for the wholesale equitable waste that has been inflicted upon the land. The position of chief executive for a prominent bank, as president of the board of the Columbus Regional Planning Commission, is a primary piece of evidentiary proof which explains just how the economically desolate land is suppressed. This is further extrapolated by forms allegedly filed with the Security and Exchange Commission, showing the private ownership of multiple state assets by the Vanguard Group and the Ohio-specific Rockbridge Capital Groups, leveraging of the Hocking Valley for private interests. If that wasn't enough to explain the interconnected levels of enemy occupation, the city of Lancaster in Ohio bought and is in possession of an apparently non-existent property, as well as being a double owner on others and many other suspicious activities. That's reference number 17. All of these have the reference notes on them. Finally, the meeting minutes for the Hocking County Commission in Ohio includes the name of Triad Government Systems. The property address shows an unmarked building in Xenia, Ohio, while a Florida filing has a variety of different property addresses conflicting with other business filings. Hostile operations against children. When it comes to children, the enemy occupational motives could not be more apparent when considering two seemingly disconnected documents. As listed on a notice to Americans for an imminent enemy occupation, a worldwide initiative for safer schools proclaimed that schools would never be used for military purposes. This motive is manifested in a document that promotes the removal of JROTC programs from schools. Now, the perspective towards children by these enemy occupation forces becomes transparent in a memorandum of understanding that charges the Humane Society to take children from their homes. The Humane Society being the entity that manages stray cats and dogs, among other animals. It is made clear by these elements that children are considered a target for the plans. In addition, as listed in the notice for this topic, the leveraging of children for intelligence gathering operations is evident. And then here I have a statement of character and signature. And finally, appendix of references. And as you can see, the majority of this document are the references or the evidentiary proof used, and I won't go through all of that. A lot of the evidence that I've used has been listed or anyway explained in previous videos, and some of it is new, but either way, in order to keep the video shorter, I won't cover that. Thank you. Hope you've enjoyed this, and stay tuned for the next one.